I also think that there's real value in the market driving this stuff as well, whether that's through those kinds of standards or just in terms of capital, recognizing that companies that do this well with providers that are known for this work, to say actually our capital is safer with this group than that one operating in a similar context.
Today's chat is all about social license to operate. It's the S in the ESG, the letter that is responsible for a ton of conversation in today's mining and exploration environment. Not a new concept at all, of course, but a very important responsibility for us all to own as we plan to sustainably extract the various minerals we need to support the energy transition that has everybody talking these days. It's been a topic that lacks standards or alignment, and Kieren Moffat is on a mission to change that. Kieren is a social scientist with a PhD in social psychology, and he is the founder of VoconiQ. He and his team developed a robust, science-based approach to understanding social license to operate. In 2019, he spun this science out of CSIRO and created VoconiQ. They help companies to better manage their social license to operate, which they do through a science-driven approach that captures deep social insights into community sentiment across time and locations. In this conversation, we talk about how to create quantitative social license benchmarks for companies, comparing performance against peers and between industries. We talk about how important insights in quantitative metrics are for funders, banks, and institutions. We discuss the general approach and a bit of an explanation of the product that VoconiQ offers, and their uniqueness by creating their own segment in the market through a first-mover advantage. Ask him whether their solutions apply to just the big companies and whether Kieren sees a future in these new standards integrating with the various international reporting codes out there. We also briefly talk about the difference between social license to operate and social responsibility, and the challenges of balancing delivering high quality of service with strong company growth. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let's get into it. Hey Kieren, how's it going?
Good to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. I don't think we've run into each other before, but I found quite interesting to read about your background and what you're up to, coming out of the CSIRO sort of incubation factory of good ideas.
That's what I saw you'd interviewed Chrysos as well, the guys from Chrysos who
that's right.
We know pretty well.
Yeah, and Sandy obviously a few things. I've never been part of that. I mean, spent a bit of time in Perth, but I think I've been into the CSIRO building once, just have a nosy around. But it really hit me what sort of good work is going on there and where all the innovation is coming from. But so I thought that'd be good chat to yourself and see what your background in all of this is. But like I said, I don't think we've run into each other, right? I mean, I don't know.
I don't think so. No, I don't think we have.
Yeah. It's just, networks overlap, and I think somebody said, put me onto what you're doing with, what's the company called? VoconiQ, yeah. So I had a look, and there's so much to say about this whole space of social license that I'm sure we can fill a bit of interesting time talking about it. But can you give us a bit of a background, though, before I jump in too deeply into that? What's your technical background? What space are you coming from?
Yeah, so I'm a social and organizational psychologist by training, and I started a PhD in social psychology and then did a master's in organizational psych at the same time, just because it was gave me a pragmatic applied edge to the work that I was doing, and got into the social license space via consulting work that I did before joining CSIRO. Just sort of observed the community company conflicts in real life doing other work, and then got the job at CSIRO and found my way into doing work on social license. So nice. I think that was sort of one of the things that was interesting early in this space, was bringing theory and approaches, methodologies from a different area in to look at social license and finding some cut through there.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, because one of the things I read there is this that you're trying to even quantify people's performance, and that's obviously always very interesting, because then you can start benchmarking. And if
Absolutely.
I then immediately go into the JORC space of the world, and see how companies can tick the box, so to speak, because it's not a box ticking exercise, but for the sake of making it easy to talk about it, that could be very quite useful. Is that what companies are looking for? Have you been able to talk with some of those companies and try and achieve that, or?
Yeah, so that's almost exactly what we're doing, off the back of building this growing data set of community sentiment, social performance data across the world, is then working with those companies on how can they get best value from their good performance with, say, investors in the ESG space, and then thinking about how do we provide benchmarks, and we're providing benchmarks already for companies around peers and other industries, but then moving in the near future to real live benchmarks in dashboard, and thinking about data as a service products where we can provide metrics and insights to funders and banks and global institutions without naming the companies, but really
Sure.
trying to build a data set of best practice social performance. What are the key drivers of that performance? What does a risky environment look like? How would you evaluate a new investment or a new location for a mine, for example, or a renewable energy transmission project, anything like that? Got enough data now that we can meaningfully estimate what that looks like. So, in some ways, it's a bit like putting a social layer across a geological layer if you're looking at a Geosciences Australia type approach, identifying resources and the best and most likely places to extract them without pain.
But that standardization thing must be quite difficult, right? Because all companies are different sizes. They operate in different jurisdictions with completely different levels of problems. It would be pretty hard. I mean, it'd be probably easier to do that internally, so that you have an internal standard, or at least that you can monitor based on previous year's performance or whatever that looks like. But when you compare them to each other with all these different levels, is that achievable, or?
Yeah, well, that's what we've been working on the last, nearly 14 years now. But in terms of how do you start to build complexity into the process so you can really get it observing the system in that complexity. And so in the last couple of years in particular, working on, like you say, we've got really good, consistent, systematic, meaningful comparisons across time within a site. But then also, say, within an enterprise that might have projects in 5 different countries, working on making sure that the translation of survey instruments, for example, is consistent with the meaning of the questions, and then thinking about how do we compare across sites in a meaningful way. So what we'll often do is provide a comparison of that mining company with other relevant actors within their local space, which then gives them some more context for comparing across locations and jurisdictions. So they can kind of see relative local performance and then relative enterprise performance. And that just means that you're not comparing apples and oranges without context and understanding. But then across companies, actually what we're doing is working with communities that are very similar in many ways across all of those different ways of cutting geography and time, in terms of their relationship with resources or renewables or whatever it is. There's common features of that relationship. And so there's a remarkable consistency in the way that we collect data and the way that we interpret that data and some of the patterns we see in the data. And then it's understanding that nuance locally that really helps those companies to tailor and approach a strategy, see the risks coming before they get around the corner, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because it'd be very interesting for companies, and like you said, I mean, shareholders would be very interested in that. And I'm guessing early in the stage, probably companies are more doing it internally to make sure that they've got things, that they're doing the right thing, I guess. But then at
Yeah.
some point they're going to use it and then use it to improve, like as a bit of a QA, QC sort of process. And part of good governance is to have all of these things looked at, and now you can benchmark it, and it can be in a board report, and it can actually mean something rather than have this really difficult conversation about all these fairly difficult subjects. So I get that, but obviously where the world is probably going in the next 5 or 10 years, that this becomes a draw card, a real investment draw card. Hey, have you got your your scorecard? What's your score there, and does that add to the investability? Is getting
differentiator?
Feedback? Yeah, a real differentiator.
We're already seeing that with sustainability linked loans, where you get more favorable terms and cheaper finance if you can demonstrate better than benchmark, better than average performance in the social sustainability space. IFC do loans like that, and other institutions as well.
Yeah. Do you need standard? Sorry to interrupt. Do you need ISO standards for that sort of stuff as a company? Do you need to create any? Do you need to certify that benchmark somehow, or is anybody doing anything in that space, or is it just you doing this and that's your number?
Roadmap, but around some aspects of it, but we don't at the moment, and that's largely because it's pretty new, and so just trying to get that traction, build that database, find that market fit, and demonstrate legitimacy at those different scales. We've done that at the company level, but doing that at the kind of aggregated level is the next challenge. So next logical place to go.
And where do you see the biggest response coming from? Is it juniors, or is it bigger companies? Is it Australia? Is it overseas? Because obviously Europe is being quite active in general the ESG space. I mean, that sounds very fluffy, but there's a lot of activity, if you just put it simply. Obviously, we've been talking about it here, if that's what you can call it, for quite a number of years. Where's the biggest biggest response coming from?
Yeah, it's a real mixture. So in our mining portfolio, we have juniors, prospective companies with 3 staff, so like that sort of level where they're looking to collect this kind of data to build a strategy and an approach to mining licensing and the regulator, right through to Rio Tintos of the world. Lundin Mining and Yamana Gold, these are multinational, kind of mid-tier, very large tier, big companies. In the renewables space, doing a lot of work now with transmission infrastructure. Again, just realizing the risk very acutely and needing to stand up social performance functions in those companies, and looking to do that with starting at best practice. And so in terms of locations, we do a lot of work in Australia, a lot of work in Latin America, typically out of those major centres though, like Toronto, and in Australia it's all around the country, but then into Europe, but via, say, Toronto. So the next step for us is always to get a foothold somewhere, do some sort of work that is public and available, and then use that as a way into conversations about who our systems need, and we've a few of those underway.
Yeah, and I mean, if you consult to companies then, and you give them the advice and you give them the output, whether it's in a report or that I'm sure it lies on a board table and that gets looked at, and I'm oversimplifying things, I'm sure, but just for the sake of the argument, and 9 directors look at it and said, okay, we've ticked a box, and then 2 weeks later, there's a major project in Peru because some miners just needed to close that is part of your company. But hey, we've got this fancy report that told us that everything was fine because we've got a 9 out of 10. What sort of risk and liability is there from your perspective? I mean, from a consulting perspective and a risk management perspective, is there anything you need to consider there, or?
Not a great deal. We do a lot of due diligence at the early stages of a relationship to understand all sorts of things about context and the company. But typically what we have is a group of customers that are self-selecting into a high standard. So they are typically already taking the right steps. If they can get budget to do this kind of thing, it means that they've already got support at those levels to take proactive action, and they're not greenwashing, or they're not window dressing. They're actually looking to take action. So typically they've got a pretty good handle on their risks locally. And then what our work universally demonstrates is the nuance and complexity in that risk for them. So yeah, whilst there are the usual caveats around advice that we provide, we haven't run a project yet where we weren't able to clearly understand where their key risks were through that first contact with community, that first benchmarking survey. But that's not to say it won't happen, and we've had actually very few incidents at places, company sites where we're working, and I think in part that's because, one, they're proactive in their intervention, they're proactive in their work in that space, based on our advice and others. But then also because they know where to look, they know where to go to those things. I mean, you get black swan events, of course. We had a huge sinkhole open at Candelaria mine in Chile not very long ago. That was enormous and made global news, and they shut the site for a while and whatever. But actually, as part of the existing risk profile, so that we'd help them to understand with the community that was closest to them. COVID, another great black swan event example, where it just hit everybody, and in pretty consistent ways. Everybody shut down. And so, in that context, of course, we didn't predict a pandemic, but with our platform, we're able to repurpose that overnight to act as their eyes and ears and engagement conduit to communities that were then isolated from everybody after those companies had lost their key mechanism for engaging community, which was face-to-face.
Right. But those are sort of kind of acts of God, right? And I'm sure a community wouldn't hold a mining company responsible for a sinkhole opening up unless it's to do with the mining, right? I mean, if I think about a mine like Waihi in the North Island, if you start blasting and you've got a town sitting right on top of your mine and something goes wrong, that's a pretty obvious arrow to the right with some angry people knocking on your door. But, a lot of those things companies can't do anything about. And that's incidentally also, just talking about the difference in terms between social license to operate, which obviously puts the emphasis on the company to obtain something, versus the term social responsibility, which is something that you just must do because it's the right thing to do, right? I mean, how do you? Those terms have been around for a while, but I kind of prefer that social responsibility phrasing, because social license to operate could be seen as just another tick box to get there. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a controversial kind of term in mining, where it originated or might have originated. And became a buzzword. That's actually why I started doing research on social license in CSIRO. Myself and some colleagues decided we were going to get in and do a bit of work and maybe maybe see if we could blow up the concept, just because we could see CEOs using it in a very cavalier way. But, I think that investigation showed that the label's not important. What the label does is describe really critical, fundamental, and powerful processes in that relationship between communities and companies, and they exist whether it's called social license or the outcome of socially responsible behaviour by a company or otherwise. So I get much less caught up in the labels and the names than I do in what are we actually talking about. So what's in that box?
Sure.
And that's where the research, lived and had impact, was unpacking that box and then thinking about how do you match your research methodologies to the nature of the effect you're observing. So it's dynamic, right? That relationship is dynamic, changes day to day. So getting close to real-time data, allowing you to track that across time, lets you see social responsibility in action, those policies, those tangible things that companies are doing in line with that policy framework or whatever. And the product of that work, and you can call that a social license to operate, or you can call it whatever you like. I mean, what we measure isn't social license. What we measure is social acceptance.
Sure,
So
exactly, yeah.
measurable, pragmatic things that communities think about, because that's what we're doing. We're talking to them.
Yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, the words, you're right, but we live in woke 2023, I guess, and people will find an issue with whatever words you use at the end of the day. So what does it look like for you to, I mean, how maybe just, for people listening, companies or just consultants, I mean, I can see, and I will come back to this whole JORC piece in a second, but companies looking for your help, what does it look like for you? You have like any service company, you have obviously a bit of an orientation chat, work out what they want, proposal, come to site, have a little bit of a look around, extend your proposal, and what is the time frame of that? And what are we looking at here for like a small company with 2 or 3 operations in a country? What does the usual product look like?
Yeah. Well, so we have 2 products and an associated advisory service. So we've worked hard to really try and create more of a defined product for one, so that it's a bit more clean and simple to understand what it is that you're buying. The process then is, very typically there's sort of 2 or 3 reasons why a company would take a call or seek us out, and a lot of our work comes through referral. We have a lot of really passionate, amazing customers who will talk about our work and invite others to experience it. Then it's an initial conversation where typically they will lay out their challenges and then seek information from us about, well, how do you approach tackling that? And I think one of the really strong points of the work that we do is that it's all science-based, it's empirical, it's validated. Mm-hmm. So what we can do is we can talk about that body of evidence, that published literature that we've done, and discuss now how we allow them to access that science through a process that engages community, that is an intervention in and of itself, and then what's involved from our side and their side in delivery. So, what are the steps here? So we get a proper scope together. We understand the context a bit. We do our own desktop research about the place and the people and events in their history. We look for a local data collection partner if it's overseas. We have one here in Australia. If it's a new location, we have plenty in the countries where we operate. There's 11 countries. And then we get a plan together about, how do we get the data for your benchmark? And then how are we going to follow up, and at what cadence makes sense for that company to do the pulse surveys that track sentiment across time. We talk about insight delivery, so the format of reports that they're comfortable with, that they like. We walk them through our interactive dashboard that they'll have access to. We train them on that and provide resources so they can do that without us.
When you say we, who is we? I mean, obviously, but when does so was it 2016 or 17? When did this sort of idea get legs from or getting out of the CSIRO incubator? Was that around 2016?
We did the CSIRO On program, their commercialization program, in 2017.
Right.
And then it was about 2 years after that we eventually, myself, Naomi Baujan, and Rolf Fandrich, co-founders from CSIRO, were able to spin that company out. So that was May 2019.
Yeah.
And we had our first employee before I'd left CSIRO, our Chief Technology Officer, Sean Murphy. And then from 2019, we've grown from 4 or 5, 6 people that were spending a lot of time with us, working and delivering, to about 25 now in 3 countries.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, because I'm always interested to understand how that growth has happened, right? Because having gone through a fairly similar process myself, it's easier to get from 50 to 100 than it is to get from 2 to 4 and from 4 to 10. And specifically in the line of work that you do, because it sounds so specialized and not a lot of other people out there doing it. So when you're employing, I look for geologists, and if people have a geology degree, then I can have a conversation, right? But I mean, do you look for people with a social license degree or with a degree in psychology with a certain, I mean, obviously not a field that I have any understanding at all about. So how do you find these employees? And because it's very specialized, so if you're already sitting on 25 in different countries, you obviously put a lot of your own energy in that to make that work.
Yeah, it's a great question, because talent is everything in a business like this, where you really need people who are subscribing to the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, that's about giving communities voice and helping companies to listen to that voice. So that can be a little bit unique, but in fact, we're probably more like 3 or 4 businesses stapled together in this end-to-end service delivery that we do, which is what makes it unique. So we have a data team that is very specialized in terms of data scientists, often with a psychology or research psychology background. And so, we have networks into that world, and we've had real success in recruiting and retaining. We've had one person leave the company in all that time since 2019. Yeah. That was to go to a dream job. So the mission is critical on that. So data science, that's pretty specialized skill, but generalized social sciences. So we have some of those people in that team. We then have a delivery team, which is made up of project management type skill sets, but we love and select for interesting and unique experience, whether that's in tourism or whether that's in startups or finance or all sorts of different backgrounds, which really adds richness and depth of content knowledge in all of the different kind of industries we work in. Mm-hmm. We have comms and marketing people who have that explicit background. And then we have some folk who are effectively consultants who are in our advisory team. But, they have diverse backgrounds too. Worked for Seth Darby, our advisory head. He's worked for the World Bank and mining.
Yes, company. There's a name that that's suddenly interesting. I didn't know that. That's sorry to interrupt, but it suddenly went. No. It's a life
we recruited him out of KPMG, and he was interested in a change and liked the mission, knew our work, and that's actually often the common thread for us currently is people that know our work. So Ana Lucia Santiago, who runs our Latin American operations, she did a PhD on social license and reached out and found us, found me, and we engaged her years ago to work with us. So people find us and they like what they've done. They might have had experience in an industry with our work and thought actually that would be an interesting place to further my career.
Yeah, well, that's great, because obviously timing and you talked about sales and marketing, right? And it's so important to running a business like your own, and it's so nice to be selling into a market that is willing and looking and interested in the product that you sell, rather than jam something down people's throats that they kind of sort of need but don't really want. It is there is certainly a buzz around the place. I mean, we've got with the ASMM, there are ESG courses now. Obviously, the various reporting codes are picking this up. There is not a week that goes past where there isn't an example where a mining project falls over because of that very S in the 3-letter acronym. So that must be a pretty exciting feeling for you guys to sit around the board table and go, like, how fast can we go?
Yeah, exactly. And what's been rate limiting is building processes to scale and really building robust ways of delivering with reliable consistency and quality, and at the same time developing out the products, developing out the analytical packages, the technology platform, all of those things. Of course, you're trying to build in 100 places all at once while still delivering high quality service to customers. And that is exciting, and particularly in a context where you believe in what you're doing. There's a clear mission, a clear need on both sides, community and company or institution. And the opportunity is it's not even close to mature yet. So creating a market here, creating a segment, in fact, that's why we look unique, because I think what we've done is to create a segment.
Well, first movers, I guess, is the buzzword around it. You know, the people that you're obviously leading the space there, and that's very, that's got to be good. But yeah, those growing pains and having the systems to support the growth and all the rest of it. Yeah, that all sounds very familiar. It's with the code updates happening around the place. Maybe just to touch on that briefly. What have you looked for any dialogue with with the perks of the world or the JORCs or the CIM? Because, for instance, the JORC Code, as I'm sure you know, is being updated at the moment, and there's going to be an ESG section there's a lot more meat around the bones. What a great place to be putting some metrics into that rather than arguably some more vague language around this is a good thing to have and the competent person should focus on this. Well, if you look at the update, and I don't know if that's at all something you work with, but what do you think we should or could be doing there that's even better than we might be planning now?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's certainly an area that we've been working on internally for quite a while and having conversations with people externally, just to think about a couple of things. One, what is that direction? What is the appetite? And where is it sitting in that conversation? This kind of quantitative, systematic social performance data, or whatever we want to call it. But on the other hand, the countervailing kind of argument in my mind is I'm not so sure being really prescriptive about what you should do in that space is entirely helpful when it comes to dynamic and flexible and rich relationships between companies and communities, or industries and communities, and so perhaps there is value in having a suite of options, a range of ways to discharge your responsibility and to demonstrate transparently how you are acknowledging and addressing the unique challenges of those relationships for your business or enterprise. And so, it's a bit like, there was a debate around, should we regulate for social license? And I just feel like it really distracted from the point of that kind of work, which is to enable more constructive, more productive, more pragmatic relationships between companies and communities, and was a real red herring. And I fear the same could happen if you start to be very prescriptive about those codes and those standards. But I think what should be in those is that we have meaningful dialogue, we have meaningful understanding of the experiences, needs, and interests of the communities that we work with.
Well, these are the difficult words, right? Meaningful, and the other lawyer word, reasonable, right? I mean, what does any of it mean? And I don't know if prescriptive is the right way about it. I mean, and I think we've all sort of agreed for a while now that that's not really possible in this sort of framework of compliance, if that's what you want to call it, because ultimately the structure is what it is. It is a compliance structure, so a threshold needs to be met, and then there's this whole fuzzy grey space of what the competent person considers to be acceptable, and there's a lot of freedom in that, particularly on the JORC, which is all good. There's no surprises there, but one of the overlaps, if you like, is if a classic mineral resource gets reported, and you look at the social license to operate, to use that term, and it looks a bit dicey because the local township isn't all that happy with what you're doing, and quite demonstrably so. The argument is, do you know about that situation? Do you know enough about that situation as a professional to say, oof, I'm not sure about this, based on my experience or my framework of reference, or however you want to walk up and down that ladder, and you could have your matrix with your numbers in there, or you could have your quantitative ranking system, or any gradation of that. Based on that experience, you say, no, this is probably not, it's not so prescriptive that every tick box needs to lead to an outcome, but you come to an overall decision as a competent person. And one of the weaknesses at the moment is that it's completely left to one single person who obviously doesn't have that experience, right? I mean, as a resource geologist signing off on these kind of resources, I don't have that experience, But I've seen a number of projects fall over in that place, so I try to look at it. But I write a few interesting sounding words around it that sort of capture what I think, and that's it. If we can tap into your background and your experience and actually give some, to use your word, meaningful feedback, that then can have some overlap or some structure out of what comes out of the code. So we touch on various things that you should touch on in that space rather than just leave it all open. I think there's probably some territory that we can gain there. I mean, it hasn't really been looked at yet.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I just get suspicious or a bit edgy about saying, well, it's done, this is how you do it. And this is what success looks like in terms of the generation of that meaning. So, for example, we can do large-scale quantitative social research within the construct of our service that is top-notch quality, high confidence in that. But you can then go to a location where population is incredibly sparse, and it's not possible to deploy those same methods to understand risks or characterize the social context in the same way as you would in a more densely populated area. So you need to use a different methodology to characterize that risk or the nature of that resource in that way. But that doesn't mean it's less legitimate. And I guess where I get a bit nervous is where they say, well, there's one way, and it would be in our interest, right, to say, well, ours is the one way to understand these things. But experience shows that is just a way to ruin. So actually, I'm just agnostic about the methods you might use to understand these issues, because I think characterizing the social context is a little different to, for example, characterizing an ore body in terms of those agreed methods that are best practice that are then accepted.
Look, yes and no. I mean, I can estimate the amount of gold in deposit with 5 different techniques, and they're up to me to decide what they are. And I don't think I'm challenging that at all. I mean, the methodology is for the practitioner, and there are multiple ways to get there, and you would never put that in a guidance note. I mean, you could say there are some, and these are what they are, take your pick, and as long as you're quote-unquote competent in that space, we'll trust your judgment. I'm really more touching on the fact that right now we have a void, and it says, thou shalt be responsible, and then there is this person who knows nothing about this space that shall say whether the people are responsible about it. Well, that's just not good enough, and we're aware of that, and we're lifting that, but right now it's all sort of still sitting in a one bucket of the E, the S, and the G. So what already looking forward in the next 10 years, and I'm not talking prescriptive at all, or putting specific systems and methodologies out there, but about who does the work. Maybe that's and actually make sure that there are people that are qualified to make the judgments. And then understand the framing in which we get those judgments across as well. So what words do they use? For instance, if I talk about the amount of gold that I say somebody has, I need to use certain words to qualify the confidence that I have in that approximation, or sometimes more a guesstimate, right? So I say this is an inferred estimate, and that will immediately mean something to people. And I can imagine that the work that you do, I mean, you could run into a situation, I'm just making this up, but you're coming into a situation in PNG where there are 2 townships, and one township really likes you and the other township doesn't really like you. Well, who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, you can't just send all one town away and let you have complete unknowns, and that probably needs to be described to some degree, how much variance in your ultimate output that creates. That needs to be captured in words on a piece of paper that then gets taken into account with this downstream work of valuing this resource based on the social and these various other aspects as well. So that's sort of more the line that I was going down.
I agree. I think that sounds absolutely where things are and should be going. I mean, we're very close to being able to generate aggregated data as a service products that pull all of our data together and generate not only benchmarks of existing customer data at different scales and different jurisdictions across time, those sorts of things, but to characterize the likely effects of different types of events that occur, given we've seen those events happen in data sets across time, but then also to estimate the likelihood of similar results in places where we're not collecting primary data. And that's a key task for us this year, in fact, in our development roadmap, is to get on with filling in the gaps in between our data sets and to be able to estimate, for example, a customer that it just wants to dip its toe in the water or wants to assess and do its due diligence around social risk for a new project, or like you say, put that together with geological data to estimate a resource, or as part of a submission to a regulator or something like that. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely. I also think that there's real value in the market driving this stuff as well, whether that's through those kinds of standards or just in terms of capital, recognizing that companies that do this well with providers that are known for this work, to say, actually, our capital is safer with this group than that one operating in a similar context. And I think that's where we're at the moment with our customers. And actually, we've got a panel at PDAC in March where we're going to be looking at how companies and investors are sort of missing each other in that conversation, and trying to unpick a little bit why companies don't seem to be able to cut through with investors around those kind of metrics that we're providing as evidence of high levels of social performance, and what investors are seeking in that space to give them that confidence. And so I think that'll be a fascinating conversation.
It would be fascinating, and I'm already thinking. I mean, what do investors? I mean, you can retail investors or institutional investors. Do they know what they want? They want to be. Yeah, I can see people talking past each other in that space, and somebody needs to take the responsibility to fix that. So it'll be an interesting discussion. But as you were saying, another sort of thought occurred to me, because the ranking or the quantification is one thing, and I don't want to lean on that too much. But I guess, like with any classic risk assessment, I mean, this is a combination of likelihood and impact, right? And I mean, you're describing. So there is a general health metric that you can probably pick, which probably has a large range of error to it, because there's a bunch of things that may happen. They're very unlikely, but if they happen, they're catastrophic. And your assessment on the ground, I mean, again, an example, and just keeping this close to home here, a mine like Waihi in the North Island of New Zealand, there's obviously a whole community that has been for some time on edge. So you would somehow describe that risk against the likelihood of that turning into a major event that would literally stop your operations overnight. And all you need to do is watch the news and see a couple of Extinction Rebellion demonstrations at IMARC and add a couple of other things, and suddenly you got people chained up to every fence. And that's something that you then somehow need to quantify in that matrix of likelihood versus, and then come up with this overall final number. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, that would be very challenging, but interesting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we've worked with Waihi to use a fascinating context. Sefton Darby and Danielle Crawford, who's also in our team, they used to work at Waihi, and we do work with Northern Star at KCGM in Kalgoorlie Boulder. Very similar situation, and supported them with a relocation of a community over the top of their underground gold mine there. So in last year, and in that process, we combined our local voices data, so our local level community sentiment data we've been collecting for years with KCGM, with a traditional social impact assessment type approach, but with some important differences that were in communities' interests and therefore in companies' interest to understand risk through their eyes rather than exclusively through the companies, and apply those same principles that we use in our work generally around ethical and transparent research practices, and really giving community members power in that process to help us to understand what are the likelihoods of those those risks or impacts, and severity of those. And then trying to think about, well, how do we make this available not just to the company to inform their decision making and the way that they're engaging with regulator, whoever else, but also make that information available back to community in a way that is accessible and digestible, which is very typically exactly not how social impact assessments are done. And so, what we're doing there is stepping back a little bit and going, well, where is their power in this process? Not only to understand and support an outcome for the company, but actually as a social license intervention with the community to demonstrate procedural fairness so that you're listening and responding to their concerns in the process of understanding. And that's very deep in our DNA, in everything that we do. So they are fascinating ideas. We've got big plans for social impact assessment because it's an area that I think we could do a lot better.
Yeah, no, that's great. And maybe just to touch on go back to the commercial side of things, and I don't know to what degree you want to not discuss some of this, but what's the vision in the next sort of 20 years for you as a company, and what structure are you going to try and follow? Is this going to be organic growth, or are you guys looking to partner up with bigger groups, or what's the sort of the exits that you look at for yourself and others? I mean, I don't know who holds the company. Obviously 3 founders, and probably private to some degree, and probably all secret stuff. But if you feel comfortable talking about some of the bigger plans,
all on the ASIC register, so it's all publicly available. But with multiple shareholders that all share the same vision, and that is the selection process in terms of who you choose to partner with internally, right? Which is, well, who's drunk the Kool-Aid? Who's going to go on the journey to its natural conclusion here? And we have very big ambitions for what is possible in this space. So our strategy coming out of CSIRO was, first of all, we were very fortunate and worked hard with CSIRO to take work with us to deliver as a subcontractor to CSIRO. So we had to honour the CSIRO brand and our reputations that we developed there by delivering work to projects to companies like Rio Tinto and BHP and to others. So coming out of CSIRO, our first step was, well, don't fall over. Deliver that work that we've won. Second stage in our second year was, let's grow sustainably. Let's bootstrap to value. So let's actually work on this business until we understand it, feel comfortable about running it, and then grow organically around customer demand. And we grew from 5 to 20 odd people in that period through a global pandemic, mind you, which was very challenging. And then the next phase was, year 3 was to start building the systems and processes for scale, for scalability. And now we're heading into our 4th year. The goal is to seek external funding to accelerate the development of our plan, which involves building out our technology roadmap, building a customer portal and platform so that they can take more control of the process, and lighter touch for us, to build a customer community, to be exchanging the insights that they derive from the work, which our customers do informally, but to do that in a more formal and supported way. And also to really lean into helping our customers to develop their own capabilities in this engagement science space. So through training and development, and really smart ways of identifying patterns in data, and interventions that others have taken with that same sort of scenario, and really connecting people to the power of that aggregated data in very clear, simple and precise ways. So looking to scale on that side, and then also to identify new customers like the institutions that you've been talking about, through data as a service type products that we can deliver with those aggregated data products.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. So big plans really is the summary of that. And who you collected around you to help you with all of that? I mean, it sounds like a very sort of entrepreneurial angle that you've picked yourself. And again, trying to grow something on this side of the ditch, it's not easy. I mean, it all sounds wonderful, and I can sit here and get all excited about the way you obviously talk about it very passionately, which I really think is fantastic. But you don't just do that. I mean, somebody needs to write that investment plan and that strategy, and it all takes hours. And then somebody still needs to do the consulting. And then, if you hire people, then that money needs to come from somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. So love the plans, and really wish you good luck with that. If I hear anybody interested or somebody's interested, I guess get in touch. But really, really good plans. Anything that I forgot to ask, or what question would you ask yourself if it's in this?
That's a good one.
Because it's not really my field necessarily, right? So I can sit here with my entrepreneur hat on and say, well, that's fascinating. You're trying to grow this in this current market. That's pretty tricky. But what keeps you up at night is another way to ask things, other than another pandemic that keeps everybody at home, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. What keeps me up at night? I think there are a couple of things that keep me up at night. One is, making sure that my team feel like they're getting everything they need from me and the company to feel comfortable and clear and secure. And the other thing that keeps me awake at night is, making sure that we're in a position to follow through on those commitments internally and with customers. So winning work whilst building the plane as you've jumped off the cliff. So delivering and building, and now seeking investment to grow faster. That's a lot to keep in your head. I mean, what is absolutely fundamental, I think, in our progress to date, is that it's not just my head that lives in. That there are the three founders, of course, but Sean Murphy's a great colleague and our chief technology officer. So we talk about the technical stuff, but it's also a way to kind of talk about the vision stuff and what's possible. And he's thinking about that from his perspective. And then Sefton, builds out our leadership team as head of advisory with this wealth of experience in these spaces. So we all come at this from different directions. Rolf is a mining engineer and business development specialist from CSIRO days. So he has that lens. He looks after all our finance. So he's always living in my head with the numbers. And Naomi's been delivering these projects with me for near on sort of 14, 15 years. So she brings a very pragmatic approach to all of this as well, but also with a clear understanding of that vision that's shared, and it's her passion too. I mean, it's for both of us. It's almost our life's work. So so having multiple heads together thinking about these things from different perspectives is enormously important in being able to do all of those things at the same time. But strengthen the team and building trust within our team as we advise our customers to do with their communities is actually fundamental. So we've spent a lot of energy and a lot of time on ensuring that we are constructing a resilient, trusting internal culture that enables us to manage those stresses and to do that with each other in respectful and humble ways. It's not easy. It is literally the stuff that keeps me awake at night because it's compelling, but it's hard. It's hard.
Well, the way I hear you talk about it, because I was gonna say they're exactly the same things that keep me up at night. You got people working for you. The mouths to feed. There's a team there that relies on the direction that you're taking, and but the word that you mentioned there is obviously vital. It's the culture and the passion that you share, and as tricky as it is to get that mix right, once you have it, the thing starts, binding together pretty quickly. And it sounds like, you've got all the right people around you and that clear vision and goal. So, no doubt that this will fly higher. And just listening to it, I can't believe that I haven't clipped onto it earlier. So whoever it is that got me in touch, if you're listening, thanks very much. But And maybe we can pick up the conversation at a later date, because there's definitely a few overlaps in the work that we do, and yeah, I would love to see if there are a few things that we can learn internally as well from the work that you guys do, because I'm pretty sure that there's plenty of overlap. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, and yeah, for those who are listening, want to know more, can drop a link, drop a comment down in the comments box, and any links that you want to share, I usually put those in as well. So if you've got a couple other than the website, obviously, that I'll put in. But thanks very much for making the time.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Excellent, man. Okay, we'll see you again in the future.
Thanks, Rene.
Cheers, Kieren.